The Chevy's transmission had given up easier than expected. Lance Varela wiped grease from his knuckles, checking his phone. 4:47 p.m. Rachel's live stream wouldn't start until 6. He could surprise her with dinner, maybe patch things up after their fight about the mortgage. Torque City Customs sat quiet in the late afternoon heat, tools gleaming under fluorescent lights. 17 years he'd built this place from nothing, turning rust buckets into dreams. The Army taught him discipline, but the garage taught him patience. Every bolt had its purpose, every engine its rhythm. His boots echoed across the shop floor as he locked up early. The drive home took 12 minutes through neighborhoods where blue-collar met suburban sprawl. Kids played in yards while their parents mowed identical lawns. Normal people living normal lives. The house looked peaceful from the curb. 2-story colonial, white picket fence, Rachel's Range Rover in the driveway. He'd bought it for her birthday last year, when her fitness channel hit 50,000 subscribers. She'd kissed him then, called him her hero. Lance slipped his key into the front door, muscle memory guiding him through the foyer. Rachel's laughter drifted from upstairs, bright and performative. She must be practicing for tonight's stream about balanced relationships and authentic living. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking familiarly. Their bedroom door stood slightly ajar, Rachel's ring light casting harsh shadows across the hallway. Her voice carried clearly now. "You're such a bad boy, Gavin. My viewers would die if they knew what we do when I'm not streaming." Lance froze. His hand found the doorframe, splinters of painted wood pressing into his palm. Through the crack, he saw his wife of 19 years straddling someone who definitely wasn't him. Gavin Wexler, gym CEO, corporate sponsor, the man who'd been helping Rachel expand her brand. Rachel's back arched as she rode him, completely without clothes except for her wedding ring. The ring Lance had saved 3 months to buy, working double shifts at his old job. Gavin's hands gripped her hips possessively, his tattooed arms flexing with each thrust. "Tell me how much better I am than your mechanic husband," Gavin growled, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "So much better," Rachel gasped, throwing her head back in ecstasy Lance had never seen from her. "Lance is just boring. All he cares about are those stupid cars. You make me feel alive." Lance's phone trembled in his grip as he started recording. The camera captured everything. Rachel's face twisted in pleasure, Gavin's smug satisfaction, the wedding photos watching from the nightstand like judges in a courtroom. 17 minutes of footage. Every moan, every degrading comment about their marriage, every promise they made about running away together once they handled the Lance problem. His jaw clenched until his teeth ached. The urge to kick down the door, to wrap his oil-stained hands around both their throats, burned through him like engine fire. But Lance had learned control in Iraq, learned that the deadliest weapons were patience and planning. He backed away from the door, his boots silent on carpet he had installed himself last summer. Down the stairs, through the kitchen where Rachel's motivational quotes hung framed above the sink. Out the back door, past the garden they'd planted together when Ivy was small. In his truck, Lance sat for 5 minutes watching his house. Lights glowed warmly in windows. The American flag hung limp from its pole. Everything looked perfect from the outside. His fingers found Ivy's contact. Their daughter, 17 and sharp as Damascus steel. The only good thing to come from his marriage. The only person he could trust completely. The message was short. Pack light, don't trust your mom. Tommy Castellano's scrapyard sprawled across 40 acres of industrial wasteland, a graveyard of automotive dreams guarded by razor wire and German shepherds. In its heart sat a reinforced shipping container Tommy called the bunker, originally built for storing valuable parts, now serving as Lance's temporary headquarters. 3 days since the discovery. 3 days of living on coffee and rage while Rachel played the concerned wife, calling his phone hourly with tearful voicemails about working through their problems. Lance spread printed screenshots across a salvage desk, each image a piece of the puzzle. Rachel's text messages with Gavin stretched back 14 months. Hotel receipts, cash withdrawals, even a pregnancy scare that had nothing to do with her husband. "She's good," he muttered, highlighting another lie in yellow marker. Real damn good. The affair wasn't just about Zex. Rachel and Gavin had been planning something bigger, leveraging her growing social media influence to launder money through fake fitness products and charity events. Her authentic lifestyle brand was a front for moving dirty cash from Gavin's various businesses. Ivy's footsteps crunched on gravel outside. She'd been sneaking over after school, her mother believing she was at drama club. Smart girl, his daughter. Got that from him. Dad? She poked her head through the container door, holding a laptop bag. I got into Mom's cloud storage. Pride and worry warred in Lance's chest. Ivy had inherited his methodical mind and her mother's ruthless ambition, a dangerous combination in a teenager who'd just learned her world was built on lies. What did you find? He gestured to a folding chair beside his makeshift desk. Ivy opened her laptop, fingers flying across keys. Mom's been running a fake charity called Fitness for Veterans. Look at this. The screen filled with bank statements, donations flowing in, supposedly for gym equipment for injured soldiers. But the money got diverted through shell companies, eventually landing in accounts controlled by Gavin Wexler. They've stolen over $200,000, Ivy said, her voice tight with disgust. From people trying to help veterans like you. Lance's hands clenched into fists, using his military service to con people. Rachel had found his deepest wound and twisted the knife. There's more, Ivy clicked through folders. Mom's been tracking your daily routine, your clients, even your bank passwords. She screenshots everything. More evidence of systematic betrayal. Rachel had been documenting his life like a surveillance target, probably planning to paint him as unstable or abusive when she finally made her move. His phone buzzed. Text from Rachel. Lance, I'm worried sick. Please come home so we can talk. I love you. The hypocrisy made his stomach turn, but it also sparked an idea. Ivy, how good are you with video editing? Pretty good. Why? Lance pulled up the bedroom footage on his tablet. Because your mother's about to get served with divorce papers, and I want it to happen during her live stream. They worked through the night, splicing together a compilation that told the whole story. The affair, the fraud, the systematic deception. Nothing explicit, but damning enough to destroy Rachel's carefully crafted image. By dawn, they had a plan. Lance would file for emergency custody and a restraining order, serving the papers publicly to create maximum humiliation. Meanwhile, Ivy would leak evidence of the fake charity to veteran support groups online. Dad, Ivy said as they prepared to leave the bunker, what if Mom tries to hurt you? Legally, I mean. She's got Gavin's lawyer. Lance smiled grimly. Then we'll hurt them back harder. Your old man didn't survive Fallujah by playing nice. At 6 p.m. sharp, Rachel went live from their bedroom, the same bed where she betrayed her marriage. 5,000 viewers watched her discuss maintaining closeness in long-term relationships while wearing the yoga outfit Gavin had bought her. The doorbell rang midstream. Rachel's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. That must be Lance. He's been working so hard lately. But it wasn't Lance at the door. It was a process server with a manila envelope and a crap-eating grin. Rachel Varela, you've been served. The stream erupted in chaos as papers scattered across Rachel's perfectly arranged set. Divorce petition, restraining order, emergency custody filing, and a still frame from the bedroom video, showing just enough to make the situation crystal clear. Rachel's face went white as her chat exploded with questions. 5,000 viewers became 10,000 as word spread. Screenshots flooded social media within minutes. Her perfect life crumbled in real time, broadcast to the world she'd tried so hard to impress. Lance watched from the bunker, Tommy's whiskey burning his throat as justice finally started to flow. The retaliation came swift and brutal. Lance woke to find his bank accounts frozen, credit cards canceled, and a restraining order preventing him from entering his own garage. Jared Nye had moved fast, filing emergency motions claiming Lance was mentally unstable and potentially violent. The forged police reports were masterful fabrications, domestic disturbance calls that never happened, witnesses who didn't exist, even a fake psychiatric evaluation suggesting Lance suffered from PTSD-induced rage episodes. Gavin's money had bought the best legal corruption available in their county. They're trying to destroy you financially, Ivy said, scrolling through court documents on her laptop. They sat in a Denny's booth at 2 a.m., the only place still open where they could talk privately. Mom cleaned out the joint accounts yesterday, transferred everything to some LLC. Lance stabbed his eggs with more force than necessary. 42 years old and starting over with nothing but the clothes on his back and a teenage daughter who'd chosen sides. The unfairness of it burned like acid in his throat. We need help, he admitted. Someone who understands their game. That's when Tori Nunez walked into their lives. Lance had heard her podcast, Justice Served Cold, true crime stories about corruption in small-town America. What he hadn't known was that Jared Nye had once been her target. They met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where Rachel's spies couldn't follow. Tori looked like a college professor. Oversized glasses, professional blazer, voice recorder always ready. But her eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone who'd learned to hunt carnivores. Jared Nye destroyed my sister's divorce case 3 years ago, she said without preamble. Forged documents, bribed witnesses, the whole playbook. By the time we caught him, my sister was homeless and her ex-husband had custody of their kids. Lance leaned forward. Why didn't you expose him then? I tried. But Jared's got connections in the State Bar Association, judges who owe him favors. Small-town corruption runs deep when people know where the bodies are buried. She slid a tablet across the table showing financial records. But now he's gotten sloppy. Gavin's gym is a money laundering operation for some very nasty people. Jared's been moving cash through fake legal settlements, creating paper trails even a first-year law student could follow. The plan crystallized quickly. Tori would go undercover, pretending to need Jared's services for a fictional divorce case. Meanwhile, Lance would gather intelligence on Gavin's operation, using skills the Army had taught him about reconnaissance and surveillance. For 2 weeks, they built their case methodically. Tori recorded meeting after meeting where Jared casually admitted to fabricating evidence and bribing court officials. Lance followed Gavin's associates, documenting pill deliveries disguised as protein powder shipments and counting cash deposits that never appeared on tax returns. The breakthrough came when Tori got Jared drunk at a bar near the courthouse. Her hidden camera captured him bragging about the Lance Varela case, explaining in detail how he'd manufactured domestic violence allegations and convinced a judge to freeze assets based on clear and present danger. The beauty of it, Jared slurred into his whiskey, is that once you paint a guy as dangerous, everything he does looks suspicious. Try to defend himself? He's aggressive. Stay quiet. He's plotting something. It's a perfect trap. Lance watched the footage later in Tommy's bunker, his hands shaking with rage. They'd turned his military service, his pride in protecting others, into evidence of mental instability. Every sacrifice he'd made for his country became ammunition for their character assassination. We've got enough, Tori said, reviewing their collected evidence. Jared's confessions, Gavin's money laundering, Rachel's charity fraud, we can burn them all down. But revenge would have to wait. At 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, Lance's world shifted again. Ivy's school called. She hadn't shown up for sixth period. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Security cameras showed her leaving with someone in a gray hoodie, face obscured. The ransom demand came an hour later. Not money, they wanted all evidence destroyed, all legal actions dropped, and Lance to disappear permanently. In exchange, Ivy would be returned unharmed. They've got my daughter, Lance told Tori, his voice hollow with fear and fury. Then we end this, she replied, checking the batteries in her recording equipment. Tonight. The hunt was about to become a war. The GPS tracker in Ivy's backpack, Lance's paranoid precaution after the divorce papers were served, showed her location as an abandoned industrial complex on the east side of town, the same area where Gavin's gym had originally operated before moving to its upscale location. Lance drove through the night in a stolen Audi he'd built 2 years earlier for a client who'd never paid. The irony wasn't lost on him. His own craftsmanship would help rescue his daughter from the mess his marriage had become. The complex sprawled across several acres of cracked concrete and rusted metal, perfect for activities that needed to stay invisible. Lance counted 3 vehicles in the parking area. Gavin's Escalade, a motorcycle he didn't recognize, and a van with tinted windows. Professional paranoia kicked in as he circled the perimeter. This felt like a trap within a trap. Too easy and too obvious. But Ivy's signal put her inside the main building, and every minute of delay increased the danger. He went in through a broken loading dock, military training guiding his movements through shadows and debris. The building reeked of motor oil and something else. Something organic and wrong that made his combat instincts scream warnings. Voices echoed from the second floor, male, aggressive, discussing disposal methods and cleanup protocols. Lance's blood turned to ice water. They weren't planning to release Ivy. This was an execution waiting to happen. He found the stairs and began climbing, each step calculated to avoid creaking metal. 17 years since Iraq, but muscle memory never faded. The weight of a weapon in his hands, the focus that came with life or death stakes. The hallway stretched ahead, office doors hanging open like broken teeth. At the far end, light spilled from what had once been a conference room. Lance could hear Ivy's voice now, scared but defiant, still fighting even while tied to a chair. "My dad's going to eliminate you all," she was saying. "You have no idea what he's capable of." A man laughed, not Gavin, someone else. "Your daddy's a washed-up mechanic with PTSD. We're not exactly shaking in our boots." Lance peered around the doorframe. 3 men, all armed. Ivy sat bound in the center, duct tape across her mouth, but eyes blazing with fury. One captor stood guard by the window while another paced nervously. The third, a mountain of muscle with gang tattoos covering his neck, crouched next to Ivy, knife glinting in his hand. The tactical situation was crap. 3 armed men, 1 hostage, limited cover, and no backup coming. But Lance had survived worse odds in places where American flags got burned for entertainment. He created a distraction first, a thrown chunk of concrete that crashed through a window at the opposite end of the building. 2 men went to investigate, leaving just the tattooed giant with Ivy. Lance moved like smoke, crossing the hallway in 3 silent strides. His forearm caught the guard across the throat, crushing his windpipe before he could scream. They went down together, the knife skittering across broken glass. What followed wasn't a fight. It was controlled violence, precise and efficient. Lance had learned to eliminate in a dozen different ways, and 18 months of watching his life get destroyed had left him with very few moral restrictions. The giant was strong, but slow, relying on intimidation more than skill. Lance used his momentum against him, redirecting punches into concrete walls and steel beams. When the fool pulled a tool, Lance broke his wrist with a joint lock that made bones sound like bangs. The other 2 came running at the sound of struggle. Lance was ready, using their companion as a human shield while he acquired their weapons. 1 bullet to disable, not liquidation. He needed them able to talk, to confess, to burn down the network that had stolen his daughter. When the shooting stopped, Lance had 2 wounded men and 1 corpse. More importantly, he had Ivy safe in his arms, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief. "Dad," she whispered against his chest. "They were going to eliminate me after they made you watch." Red rage filled his vision. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters who'd threatened the only pure thing left in his ruined life. And somewhere out there, Rachel and Gavin thought they could use his daughter as leverage in their sick game. They'd learn different, real freaking quick. While Lance called Tori to arrange cleanup, his phone buzzed with legal notifications. Rachel had filed for emergency custody, claiming Lance was mentally unstable and dangerous to his family. Court date set for tomorrow morning. The witch had timing. He'd give her that. Abducted his daughter, then tried to steal her legally while he was dealing with the aftermath. "Let her come," Lance muttered, loading unconscious criminals into their own van. "I've got some new evidence to present." The war was escalating, but Lance Varela had stopped playing defense. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters at 8 a.m. sharp. Rachel had clearly leaked the custody hearing to media, staging another performance about being a concerned mother protecting her child from an unstable ex-husband. She wore conservative clothes and carried a folder thick with manufactured evidence. Lance watched from across the street, drinking coffee from a gas station cup while Tori streamed everything live on her podcast. Public exposure was their only weapon against a corrupted system, sunlight as disinfectant for legal rot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tori spoke into her microphone, "we're witnessing a textbook case of parental alienation and judicial manipulation. Varela's attorney has a history of manufacturing domestic violence cases to secure favorable rulings." The hearing lasted 47 minutes. Rachel's performance was masterful, tearful testimony about Lance's increasingly erratic behavior and obsession with military-style surveillance. She produced fake witness statements and doctored photographs suggesting Lance had been stalking her. Jared and I presented their case with practiced smoothness, weaving truth and fiction until even Lance started doubting his own memories. The judge, obviously in someone's pocket, nodded along sympathetically while rejecting every piece of evidence Tori tried to introduce. Temporary custody to Rachel. Supervised visitation only for Lance. Restraining order expanded to include the garage and all business premises. As they filed out of the courtroom, Rachel caught Lance's eye and smiled. Not the fake sympathy she'd shown the judge, but something cold and triumphant. She'd won another round in their private war. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," she replied. You have nothing left, Lance. No money, no business, no daughter. Maybe now you'll finally disappear like you were supposed to. That night, Lance broke into his own garage. The locks had been changed, security cameras installed, but 17 years of building the place meant he knew every weakness. He entered through the service bay, past cars he'd restored with his own hands. The authorities had inventoried everything as potential evidence, but they'd missed the hidden workshop behind the office wall. Lance had built it during the early days, a secret space where he could work on special projects without interference. For the next week, he lived like a ghost in his own business, sleeping on a cot surrounded by engine parts, eating vending machine food, working 18-hour days on a project that consumed his every waking thought. The Mustang had come to him as a rusted shell. 1969 Boss, 429, more legend than car when a collector brought it in 5 years ago. Lance had rebuilt it from the frame up, turning scrap metal into 500 horsepower of American muscle. Now he was making modifications the original designers never imagined. Armor plating welded between body panels, run-flat tires rated for police pursuit, hidden cameras with satellite uplink capability, GPS tracking so sophisticated it could follow a target across 3 states. Suburban warfare, he muttered, installing the final surveillance package. Let's see how they like being watched. The legal system had failed him, but Lance understood other forms of justice. The Mustang wasn't just transportation. It was a weapon, a mobile command center, and a psychological warfare platform, all rolled into one. While he worked, Tori's podcast gained national attention. Her expose of corruption in their county courthouse had attracted federal investigators and civil rights attorneys. The story was spreading beyond their small town, drawing scrutiny from people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. But progress came with a price. At 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, Lance's phone buzzed with a notification that stopped his heart. Warrant issued for Lance Varela. Charges include hijacking, aggravated attack, and violation of restraining order. They'd turned his rescue of Ivy into additional crimes. The men he'd fought were claiming he'd attacked them unprovoked, their wounds evidence of his dangerous mental state. Even saving his daughter became ammunition for their war. Lance stared at his reflection in the Mustang's windshield. 42 years old, a fugitive in his own town, wanted for protecting the person he loved most. The system had branded him a criminal for refusing to let them destroy his family. Fine. If they wanted a villain, he'd give them one they'd never forget. He opened his phone and deleted every contact except Ivy and Tori. Then he recorded a video message, his face calm, voice steady, every word chosen for maximum impact. My name is Lance Varela. For 19 years, I tried to be a good husband, a good father, a good citizen. I paid my taxes, served my country, built a business that employed 12 people, and supported dozens of families. The camera caught his eyes, cold now, empty of the warmth that once defined him. But good men finish last in a corrupt system. So I'm done being good. Rachel, Gavin, Jared, you wanted to play games with my life? Congratulations. You just taught a combat veteran that rules don't matter. He hit send. Uploading the video to every social media platform Ivy had shown him how to use. Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By morning, it would be national news. Lance Varela, suburban mechanic, was officially dead. What emerged from his garage that night was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. The hunter had become the hunted. Time to reverse those roles. Jared and I lived in a McMansion on Maple Ridge Drive, the kind of cookie-cutter suburb where lawyers and dentists pretended their money made them respectable. Lance had been watching the house for 3 days, learning routines, identifying vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Jared's wife was at her book club, his teenage kids at friends' houses, security system down for routine maintenance. Lance had hacked the system himself, military cybersecurity training applied to suburban warfare. He entered through the patio door, moving like a shadow through rooms decorated with the fruits of legal corruption. Expensive art, designer furniture, a wine collection worth more than most people's cars, blood money converted into bourgeois respectability. Jared was in his home office, drunk on single malt and arrogance, reviewing case files for tomorrow's court appearances. He looked up from his laptop to find Lance sitting in the chair across from his desk, patient as death itself. Jesus Christ! Jared scrambled for his desk drawer, probably reaching for a tool or panic button. Neither one's going to help you, Lance said quietly. His voice carried the absolute calm that came with complete commitment to violence. Hands on the desk, now. Jared complied, his face pale but trying to maintain lawyer composure. Lance, we can work something out. Whatever you think I've done, I know exactly what you've done. Lance placed a tablet on the desk, playing Tori's hidden camera footage. Jared's own voice filled the room, bragging about fabricating evidence and bribing judges. That's taken out of context. You can't. I can do whatever I want, Jared, because you see, I'm officially a dangerous fugitive now. Nothing left to lose. No reason to follow rules that don't apply to people like you. Lance leaned forward, and something in his eyes made Jared shrink back. Here's how this works. You're going to sign confessions for every crime you've committed in the past 5 years. Every forged document, every bribed judge, every client you've screwed over, all of it. I can't do that. My law license, my reputation? Lance's smile was a blade in the darkness. Your reputation is about to become the least of your problems. What happened next took 17 minutes. Lance had learned interrogation techniques from specialists who'd made careers out of breaking hardened terrorists. Jared Nye was just a small-town lawyer who'd gotten fat on easy corruption. The confessions were comprehensive. Dozens of cases where Jared had manufactured evidence, intimidated witnesses, and split proceeds with corrupt judges. Names, dates, bank account numbers, the entire network of rot that had infected their legal system. There, Jared gasped, his signature shaking on the final document. I've told you everything. Now get out of my house! Lance gathered the papers with methodical care. Oh, Jared, we're just getting started. The next morning, every local news outlet received copies of the confessions, along with supporting evidence. Bar Association ethics committees got detailed reports. FBI field offices received packages documenting federal crimes. And Tori's podcast ran a special episode that crashed her server from traffic volume. But Rachel's response was swift and vicious. By noon, she was on every local television station, tears streaming down her face as she described her escalating fear of her ex-husband's mental breakdown. Lance was always troubled after his military service, she sobbed into cameras. But I never thought he'd become violent. I'm terrified for our daughter's safety. The performance was masterful, designed to shift public sympathy back to her side. She even produced text messages, obviously fabricated, where Lance supposedly threatened to make her pay for divorcing him. The media ate it up. Local veterans' PTSD spiral dominated headlines. Rachel became the sympathetic sufferer again, bravely speaking out against domestic terrorism disguised as justice. But Lance had anticipated this move. That evening, as Rachel did interviews from her hotel suite, Ivy released her own video on social media. 17 years old, fierce as her father, unafraid to tell the truth. My mother is a liar, she said directly into her phone camera. I have recordings of her planning to frame my dad, evidence of her stealing money from veterans, proof that everything she's saying is BS. The video included audio clips of Rachel's conversations with Gavin, discussing how to neutralize the Lance problem permanently, her own voice condemning her as she planned his destruction. Within hours, #TeamLance was trending nationwide. Veterans groups rallied behind him. Civil rights lawyers offered assistance. The narrative was shifting, but slowly, too slowly for a man running out of time and patience. That's when the bombing happened. Gavin's primary car dealership exploded at 3:17 a.m., taking half a city block with it. The blast shattered windows 3 streets away and left a crater where the showroom used to stand. Arson investigators found traces of military-grade explosives, the kind that only combat veterans would know how to obtain and deploy. Every news outlet in the state ran the same story. Fugitive veteran escalates to terrorism. Lance watched the coverage from a motel room 20 miles away, his blood turning to ice as reporters described the clear connection between his military background and the bombing methodology. They had him dead to rights, motive, means, opportunity, and a psychological profile that made him the perfect suspect. Except he hadn't done it. The explosion was professional work, designed to look like veteran terrorism while eliminating evidence of Gavin's money laundering operation. Someone had used Lance's fugitive status as cover for their own cleanup job. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying the show, G. Gavin. The fool had bombed his own dealership, destroying evidence while framing Lance for domestic terrorism. Brilliant, ruthless, and completely damn evil. Lance's reflection in the motel mirror looked like a stranger. Hollow cheeks, dead eyes, The face of a man who'd lost everything and found something terrible in its place. The system had painted him as a monster. Maybe it was time to become one. He opened his laptop and began typing, fingers moving with mechanical precision across keys that spelled out damnation. If they wanted war, he'd give them war. But first, he needed to save his daughter from the crossfire. Judge Harold Wickham lived alone in a craftsman house built during the Eisenhower administration, a widower whose only companions were bourbon and the ghosts of 30 years on the bench. Lance had been watching him for a week, learning his routines, waiting for the right moment to make his approach. The moment came on Sunday morning, when Wickham sat on his back porch, reading case files and drinking coffee from a mug that declared him world's greatest grandpa. Lance approached through the garden, emerging from behind tomato plants like a specter of consequences finally come calling. "Morning, Your Honor." Wickham looked up from his files, squinting in the early sun. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by the kind of fear that came from understanding exactly how far beyond the law they'd all traveled. "Mr. Varela, I was wondering when you'd come to see me." Lance settled into the opposite chair uninvited, his movements calm and controlled. "Were you now? And why's that?" "Because you're not stupid. And you know I didn't make those rulings in your case based on evidence or law." Wickham closed his files with shaking hands. "You know exactly what Jared Nye has on me." The confession came easier than Lance had expected. Gambling debts from Atlantic City, paid off by men who expected favors in return. A drunk driving incident covered up by police who owed their careers to judicial appointments. Photographs of Wickham with courtesans in a hotel room that looked suspiciously like a staged blackmail operation. 27 years I've been clean," the old man said, staring into his coffee. "But the past never lets go, does it? One mistake, and you belong to them forever." Lance felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. Wickham wasn't evil like Jared or Rachel, just weak, compromised, trapped in a web he'd helped weave but couldn't escape. "Here's what's going to happen," Lance said quietly. "You're going to reverse every ruling you made in my case. Custody goes back to shared, restraining orders get dissolved, my assets get unfrozen. I can't just— Yes, you can. Emergency judicial review based on new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. Jared's confessions give you all the cover you need." Wickham nodded slowly, understanding the lifeline being offered. "And in return? Your secrets stay secret. The photographs, the gambling, all of it. Clean slate." They shook hands like gentlemen making a deal that would save them both from drowning. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Lance couldn't attend, still a fugitive, but Tori would represent his interests as a legal advocate. More importantly, she'd arranged for the entire proceeding to be live-streamed, broadcasting judicial transparency to an audience hungry for justice. When Wickham entered his courtroom, he looked like a man who'd found his backbone after decades of searching. The gallery was packed with reporters, veterans advocates, and citizens who'd been following the case on social media. Rachel sat at the plaintiff's table in another carefully chosen outfit, radiating wounded dignity and maternal concern. Jared Nye flanked her, trying to project confidence despite the federal investigation circling his practice like vultures. "Before we begin," Wickham announced, "I want to address serious allegations that have come to my attention regarding prosecutorial misconduct in this case." He played selections from Jared's recorded confessions, admissions of forged documents, manufactured witness statements, and judicial bribery that made the gallery gasp in shock. Rachel's face went white as evidence of her systematic deception filled the courtroom. "Based on this new evidence," Wickham continued, "I am vacating all previous rulings in Varela. Custody reverts to shared arrangement. All restraining orders are dissolved and frozen assets will be released immediately." Rachel jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These recordings were obtained illegally. They're taken out of context." "Mrs. Varela, I strongly advise you to remain silent. Based on what I've heard today, you may be facing criminal charges of your own." The live stream exploded with comments as viewers watched justice finally being served in real time. #Justice for Lance trended globally within minutes, shared by everyone from military veterans to legal reform advocates. But Lance wasn't watching the courtroom victory. He was parked outside Rachel's hotel, watching through binoculars as she stumbled from the building like someone who'd been gut-punched. Her phone was pressed to her ear, voice rising in panic as she tried to reach Gavin. The call went straight to voicemail, then another, and another. Lance smiled grimly. He'd been monitoring police frequencies all morning. waiting for the news he knew was coming. At 11:43 a.m., it finally arrived. Units respond to 1247 Industrial Parkway. Federal task force requesting backup for high-priority arrest. Gavin Wexler, Jim's CEO and money laundering mastermind, had been taken into custody by FBI agents who'd been building their case for months. The bombing of his own dealership had been the final piece of evidence they needed, insurance fraud on top of everything else. Rachel stood alone in the hotel parking lot, her perfect world crumbling in real time. No husband to manipulate, no lawyer to manufacture evidence, no corrupt judge to rubber stamp her lies. Just a woman who'd gambled everything on a scheme that was always destined to fail. Lance's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the pier. Come alone. R." The pier stretched into Lake Morrison like a wooden finger pointing toward nothing. Rachel stood at its end, silhouetted against gray water and grayer sky. She'd changed from her courtroom costume into jeans and a hoodie. The first time Lance had seen her dressed like a normal person in years. He approached cautiously, expecting ambush or trick. But Rachel looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the collapse of her carefully constructed reality. When she turned to face him, her eyes held the hollow desperation of someone who'd finally run out of moves. "You won," she said without preamble. "Congratulations." Lance stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to react if she tried something stupid. "This isn't about winning, Rachel. This is about consequences." She laughed bitterly. "Consequences? Right. Like you're some kind of moral authority." "I never claimed to be, but I never lied to you for 14 months either. Never stole from veterans or used our daughter as a weapon." Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "You think this is all my fault? You think Gavin and I just decided to destroy your precious little life for fun? Enlighten me." "You were suffocating me." The words exploded from her like steam from an overheated engine. 19 years of being married to a man who cared more about carburetors than conversation. 19 years of watching you disappear into that garage while I built a business, raised our daughter, kept this family together. Lance felt a stab of something, not quite guilt, but recognition. There was truth mixed in with her self-serving narrative. "So you decided to steal from me instead of divorce me? I decided to take what I deserved. You think I didn't contribute to Torque City Customs? I handled the books, managed the insurance, dealt with customers, while you hid in your shop playing with toys? And the affair, the fake charity, using military veterans to launder dirty money?" Rachel's face hardened again. Gavin showed me what life could be like with a man who had ambition, who wanted more than just fixing other people's broken things. A man who bombed his own business to frame me for terrorism. That stopped her cold. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across her features. "What are you talking about?" Lance studied her reaction, looking for signs of deception. But Rachel's confusion seemed real. She genuinely didn't know about Gavin's final gambit. "Your boyfriend blew up his dealership 3 nights ago. Made it look like veteran terrorism, complete with military-grade explosives. Very convenient way to destroy evidence while painting me as a domestic terrorist." Rachel sat down heavily on a bench, the fight draining out of her. He told me he had to handle some business problems. Said we might need to leave town for a while. He was planning to disappear, Rachel. Probably with all the money you helped him steal. You were useful for laundering cash and manipulating the legal system, but did you really think he was going to take you with him? The silence stretched between them, filled only by water lapping against pier supports and the distant cry of seagulls. Rachel stared at the lake like it held answers to questions she'd never thought to ask. "I was going to leave you anyway," she said finally, "after Ivy graduated. I had it all planned out, the divorce, the settlement, starting over somewhere new. With my money. With half of everything we built together. That's how divorce works, Lance. Not when you're committing fraud to get it." Rachel turned to look at him directly for the first time in their conversation. "You want to know the truth? The real truth?" Lance waited. "I stopped loving you years ago. Maybe when Ivy started middle school, maybe before that, but I stayed because leaving meant admitting failure. Meant starting over at 40 with nothing but a fitness blog and a high school education." The honesty hit harder than her betrayal had. Lance realized he'd suspected as much, had felt the emotional distance growing between them, like ice forming on a winter pond. "So you decided to destroy me instead." "I decided to survive. And if that meant taking you down? She shrugged. You're a big boy. You could have handled yourself. What about Ivy? What about using our daughter as a weapon in your war? For the first time, Rachel's mask slipped completely. Pain flickered across her face. Genuine regret mixed with something that might have been love. That was Gavin's idea. He said we needed leverage. Something to keep you from fighting the custody arrangements. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I never wanted her to get hurt. But you were willing to let it happen. I was willing to do whatever it took to get free. Lance stared at his wife, his ex-wife, and tried to find some remnant of the woman he'd married 19 years ago. She was still there, buried under layers of resentment and desperation, but too changed to save. What happens now? Rachel asked. Now you live with the consequences. Gavin's going to prison for money laundering, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. His lawyer's looking at disbarment and federal charges. The fake charity you ran will get you a few years if you're lucky. And Ivy? Ivy chooses for herself. She's 17, old enough to decide which parent she wants to live with. Rachel nodded slowly. She'll choose you. She always has. They sat in silence for a while. Two people who'd shared nearly 2 decades coming to terms with how completely they'd failed each other. The lake stretched out before them, dark water reflecting cloudy sky like a mirror of their ruined marriage. Lance, Rachel said eventually, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about the veterans' charity. That was crossing a line. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that she understood the depth of what she'd done. I know you are, he replied. But sorry doesn't bring back the money those people donated thinking they were helping wounded soldiers. Rachel stood up, brushing dust from her jeans. I should go. Turn myself in before they issue another warrant. Lance watched her walk back down the pier, her figure growing smaller with each step. At the halfway point, she stopped and turned back. Lance, what you said about Gavin planning to leave me behind, do you really think that's true? Lance considered lying, offering some small comfort to soften the blow, but they were past the point where kindness mattered more than truth. Yeah, Rachel, I really do. She nodded once and continued walking, disappearing into the gray afternoon like a ghost of the life they'd once shared. Lance sat alone on the pier for another hour, watching the water and trying to figure out what came next. Justice had been served, mostly. His enemies were facing consequences for their actions. Ivy was safe and choosing to stay with him. But victory felt hollow when everything else was ashes. His marriage was over, his trust in people shattered, his faith in systems permanently damaged. The man who'd entered this war seeking justice had emerged as something harder and colder, someone who understood that the world was a battlefield where only the ruthless survived. His phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. Dad, where are you? I made dinner. Lance smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe there was still something worth saving after all. 6 months later, Lance's world had found a new equilibrium built on surveillance and suspicion. Torque City Customs reopened with military-grade security systems, background checks for every customer, and digital monitoring that would make the NSA proud. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The garage prospered in ways it never had before. Lance's story had made him famous, the veteran mechanic who'd fought corruption and won. Military contractors sent him specialty work, wealthy collectors commissioned custom builds, and automotive journalists wrote features about America's most badass garage owner. But success came with a price. Lance found himself documenting everything. Conversations recorded, movements tracked, relationships analyzed for potential threats. The paranoia that had kept him alive in Iraq now governed his civilian life, turning every interaction into a tactical assessment. Dad, you're doing it again, Ivy said one evening, catching him reviewing security footage from 3 different camera angles. Doing what? Acting like we're under siege. It's over, remember? Mom's in minimum security prison, Gavin's doing 15 years federal, and Jared Nye's selling insurance in Pittsburgh. Lance looked up from his monitors. Ivy stood in the doorway wearing her senior year homecoming dress, beautiful and confident and completely unafraid. At 18 now, she'd inherited his analytical mind without his damaged soul. Someone tried to break into the Murphy account files yesterday, he said. Probably just kids, but you installed motion sensors and ran background checks on everyone within a 3-block radius. Ivy sat on the edge of his desk. Dad, when's the last time you went on a date or had a conversation that wasn't about business? Lance considered the question seriously. 6 months of rebuilding had left little time for personal connections. Besides, who could he trust? Everyone wanted something. Access to his story, his money, his expertise in warfare, both digital and physical. I'm fine, Ivy. This is just how things are now. This is how things are because you're making them this way. She gestured toward the wall of monitors, showing every angle of the garage. You've turned us into a fortress. But what are we protecting? Before Lance could answer, his phone buzzed with a high-priority alert. Someone was trying to access his personal server through a back door he'd thought was secure. Professional work, military-grade intrusion that suggested serious players with serious resources. Stay here, he told Ivy, his voice shifting into combat mode. Don't leave this room until I get back. Dad, wait! But Lance was already moving, muscle memory guiding him through response protocols he'd hoped never to need again. The server room was in the garage's basement, protected by locks and sensors that should have been impenetrable. Should have been. The door stood open, cold air flowing from the climate-controlled space where his digital life lived on humming drives. Lance drew the Glock he'd started carrying again, approaching with tactical precision that felt as natural as breathing. Inside, a figure hunched over his main terminal, fingers flying across keys with professional efficiency. Not a teenager or casual hacker. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and how to find it. Step away from the computer. The figure turned slowly, hands visible, no sudden movements. Female, mid-30s, dressed in black tactical gear that suggested military or law enforcement background. Pretty in a dangerous way, with eyes that had seen things normal people couldn't imagine. Hello, Lance. Her voice carried a slight accent. Russian, maybe Eastern European. My name is Katya Volkov. I work for people who are very interested in your recent activities. Lance kept the tool-trained center mass. What people? The kind who don't appreciate having their money laundering operations exposed to federal investigators. The kind who lost substantial investments when Gavin Wexler's network collapsed. Ice formed in Lance's stomach. He'd assumed the story ended with prison sentences and legal victories. But money had upstream sources, and those sources didn't forgive losses easily. Gavin was small-time, Katya continued, still seated but radiating the controlled tension of someone ready to move fast. A useful idiot who handled local operations for much larger organizations. When you destroyed him, you cost very serious people very serious money. So they sent you to eliminate me? Katya smiled, and the expression held no warmth. If they wanted you dead, you'd be dead. They sent me to make you an offer. She gestured toward the computer screen, which displayed financial records Lance had never seen before. Accounts in offshore banks, transactions involving millions of dollars, a network of shell companies that stretched across 3 continents. Your wife and her boyfriend were laundering money for the Bratva, Russian organized crime. When you exposed their operation, federal investigators seized assets worth $47 million. My employers want compensation for their losses. Lance's tactical mind began calculating angles, distances, response times. The situation was deteriorating fast, and Ivy was upstairs within potential blast radius of whatever was about to happen. What kind of compensation? Your expertise. You've proven quite capable at financial warfare and legal manipulation. There are other operations that need restructuring. Other enemies that require the kind of creative problem-solving you demonstrated with Gavin Wexler. You want me to work for the Russian mafia. I want you to consider your options carefully, because the alternative is that this conversation ends very badly for everyone you care about. As if summoned by her words, movement flickered on Lance's security monitors. 3 vehicles had surrounded the garage, men in tactical gear taking positions at every exit. Professional work, military precision, overwhelming force designed to eliminate resistance before it could organize. Your move, Mr. Varela, Katya said. Join us or watch everything you've rebuilt turn to ashes again. Lance stared at the monitors showing armed men preparing to attack his sanctuary. After everything he'd survived, all the battles he'd won, it was coming down to this. Surrender his soul or lose his daughter. Some choices weren't really choices at all. I need to make a phone call, he said finally. Katya nodded. Of course. But Lance? Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Choose your words very carefully. Ivy's life depends on what you say next. The phone call went to Tori Nunez, whose investigative journalism had helped expose the original conspiracy. Lance spoke carefully, knowing hostile ears were listening, embedding coded references only she would understand. Remember that story about the custom engine rebuild? He said. The one where we had to source specialty parts from overseas suppliers? I need you to contact those same suppliers again. Tell them the rebuild is entering its final phase. Tori understood immediately. How long do you need? Give me 2 hours. If you don't hear from me by then, publish everything we discussed about international supply chains. Lance, be careful. Some engines can't be rebuilt once they blow. The line went dead. Lance turned to face Katya, who'd been monitoring his vital signs through equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. Interesting conversation, she said, but ultimately irrelevant. Your journalist friend can't help you now. Maybe not, but she can make sure the right people know what happened here. Katya's expression shifted slightly, annoyance mixed with professional respect. You're thinking tactically. Good. It shows you understand the stakes. I understand that you've made a mistake coming here. This garage is wired with enough surveillance equipment to record everything we say. Every threat you've made, every crime you've implied, it's all being transmitted to secure servers your people can't access. Impressive preparation, but ultimately futile if you're dead. Lance moved slightly, positioning himself between Katya and the stairway that led to Ivy. That's where you're wrong, because my daughter isn't here. Katya's confidence flickered. She glanced at the security monitors, scanning for signs of deception. The homecoming dress was a nice touch, Lance continued, but Ivy's been staying with her aunt in Philadelphia since last week. What you saw was performance, designed to draw you out when you finally made your move. You're lying. Am I? Check the facial recognition logs from your surveillance. Run voice analysis on our conversation upstairs. You'll find some interesting discrepancies. While Katya processed this information, Lance triggered a hidden switch beneath his desk. Emergency protocols activated throughout the garage. Blast shields dropping over windows, reinforced doors sealing potential breach points, communications equipment switching to military frequencies. Clever, Katya admitted. But you're still outnumbered 12-1 by professionals who've eliminated more people than you've repaired cars. Maybe, but they don't know this building like I do. The lights went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in hellish red. Lance moved in that split second of adjustment, muscle memory from urban combat training guiding him through space he'd modified for exactly this scenario. What followed wasn't a fight. It was systematic elimination. Lance had turned his garage into a fortress with sight lines, choke points, and defensive positions that channeled attackers into eliminate zones. The Russians were professionals, but they were operating in hostile territory, designed by someone who'd spent 6 months preparing for exactly this threat. Katya proved more formidable than her colleagues. She moved like Lance did, trained, experienced, lethal. Their encounter in the server room was brief and vicious, ending with her tasered unconscious and zip-tied to a support beam. When the shooting stopped, Lance counted 8 bodies and 3 prisoners. His garage looked like a war zone, but he was alive and his enemies were neutralized. The FBI arrived 47 minutes later, guided by Tori's reporting and Lance's own calls to federal task forces. The crime scene would take weeks to process, but the essential story was clear. Foreign criminals had attempted to coerce an American citizen, and that citizen had defended himself with extreme prejudice. Mr. Varela, Agent Sarah Chen said, surveying the carnage with professional detachment. This is becoming a habit with you. Lance sat on a crate of engine parts, bleeding from multiple cuts and wondering when violence had become his default solution to problems. They came to my home, threatened my daughter. We know. We've been tracking this cell for 8 months, ever since the Wexler investigation uncovered their money laundering network. Chen consulted her tablet. What you did here tonight, it's going to make you very unpopular with certain international organizations. More unpopular than I already was? Substantially, these people don't forget, and they don't forgive. You've cost them money and personnel. They'll send others. Lance looked around his ruined garage, bullet holes in walls he'd painted, blood on floors he'd swept, the smell of gunpowder mixing with motor oil. Everything he'd built, destroyed again by forces beyond his control. Then I guess I need to make some changes. 3 weeks later, Ivy found her father in the desert outside Las Vegas, living in a modified Airstream trailer behind a no-name auto shop that specialized in vehicles with special requirements. He looked older, harder, like someone who'd finally accepted that the world was a battlefield where peace was just an intermission between wars. "Dad," she said, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "What are you doing?" Lance looked up from the engine he was rebuilding, something European and expensive that probably belonged to someone who needed fast transportation for questionable purposes. His hands were clean for once, but his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare she remembered from her childhood. "Staying alive, keeping you safe. By disappearing? By abandoning everything we built together? By accepting reality. The garage is yours now, legally transferred before I left. You're 18. You can handle the business better than I ever could, and you'll be safer without me around to draw fire." Ivy stepped into the trailer, looking around at the sparse accommodations her father had chosen over the life they'd shared. A cot, a mini fridge, surveillance equipment, and weapons she'd hoped never to see again. "This isn't living, Dad. This is just existing." Lance set down his tools and really looked at his daughter for the first time since she'd arrived. She was beautiful and strong and everything good about the world he'd tried so hard to protect. She deserved better than a father who'd become a magnet for violence. Maybe that's all I'm good for now. "Bees." Ivy's voice carried the steel she'd inherited from both parents. "You fought for justice when the system failed. You protected our family when criminals attacked. You survived everything they threw at you, and became something I don't recognize in the process. You became someone who doesn't quit, someone who stands up when others back down." She sat on the edge of his cot, forcing him to meet her eyes. Mom destroyed herself trying to take shortcuts to happiness. Don't you do the same thing by running away from the life you earned. They talked until dawn, father and daughter working through the wreckage of choices that had brought them to this moment. By the time the sun cleared the mountains, Lance had decided to come home. The drive back to Pennsylvania took 4 days in a convoy of vehicles carrying everything Lance had built in his brief exile. The garage waited for him, rebuilt and improved under Ivy's management, ready to resume the work of turning broken things into something better. As he pulled into the parking lot, Lance realized that revenge was a circle. It brought you back to where you started, but changed. He was no longer the trusting mechanic who'd discovered his wife's affair. He wasn't the angry man who'd sought justice through manipulation and violence. He was something new. Someone who understood that the world was dangerous but still worth fighting for. Someone who'd learned that strength without purpose was just destruction, but purpose without strength was just wishful thinking. Lance Varela parked his truck in front of Torque City Customs and walked through doors that led not backward into the past, but forward into whatever came next. Behind him, the desert held secrets that would stay buried. Ahead of him, his daughter waited with keys to a kingdom built on metal and dreams and the unshakable belief that broken things could always be fixed, if you knew how to use the right tools.